The voice of sharing, Durian ASEAN.
Hi, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. Today in our ABC dialogue, we will have a guest. He's a senior professor at Help University. His name is Dr. Mohan Gurubatham. He will be talking about transcendence and globalisation towards a higher thinking society. Hi, how are you?
Hi. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, welcome to Durian ASEAN and thanks for joining us. By the way, for the listeners of Durian ASEAN, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and you can listen to us live right now at www.durianasean.com, and also you can listen to us on your mobile at TuneIn app. So before we start, I just want to thank you for joining us, and also I just want to know, the topic itself is actually quite huge. It's about transcendence and globalizations, but your background is between psychology and also I guess a bit of social science. So, what is actually a higher thinking society?
A higher thinking society. Am I clear enough?
Yeah.
A higher thinking society has to be based on higher consciousness. So if you think of consciousness as the basis of thinking, which is cognition, and thinking leading to action and action leading to achievement and fulfillment, naturally we want to raise the level of consciousness, and therefore it is much more effective because consciousness is the fundamental field of awareness. So higher consciousness for higher education and higher thinking. But typically, ordinarily, our education system all over the world has been ignoring consciousness and has been looking at thinking, developing thinking, which is also very good, which does represent a shift away from just looking at behavior.
But what is the difference between both thinking and consciousness if the government is too much focused on just thinking alone and not consciousness?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's because in the past 50 years, modern psychology, the scientific aspect of cognitive psychology, which is psychology which studies memory, attention, and thinking, how we learn about learning, learning about learning, and so on, has ignored consciousness because it thought consciousness was philosophical. Mm-hmm. But recently, in the last 20, 30 years, a lot of stunning new research has come, especially from the United States. And the first major study was published in the Scientific American in 1972 by Robert Keith Wallace, which looked at a fourth state of consciousness, which is different from waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Right now, you and I are in the waking state, and the Durian ASEAN listeners are in the waking state, mm-hmm. attending. Now, at 9:30, some people may still be asleep, especially students. So sleep is another state of natural consciousness. There's waking, and there's also dreaming. There's a fourth state, which we have always kind of suspected we had in every culture, particularly the Eastern culture, and we seem to have lost it. This fourth state of consciousness is called pure consciousness or transcendental consciousness. The word transcend means to go beyond. So beyond the three common states of experience, which are waking, sleeping, and dreaming, there is a fourth state which actually underlies these three states. It's something like the depths of the pond and the surface values of the pond, like are the three states. So when we clear the water in the pond, we find that we can experience this fourth state, which is at the basis of the pond. Now, scientifically, this has been operationalized as the wakeful hypometabolic state, which simply means it's restful alertness. The mind is alert or awake, but the body, the physiology, the nervous system, has a very low metabolic rate. The brain waves called the EEG, that's a way of measuring the cortical or neuronal activity in the brain, shows very deep relaxation in terms of frequencies, and also the power of the thinking in terms of amplitude And then there's also the heart rate, the metabolic rate. All these parameters seem to show the physiology. The body is very restful, deeper than sleep, yet the mind is awake. So there is a fourth state. We call it restful alertness or wakeful hypermetabolic state. Surprise, surprise. This state of consciousness also has been documented in the Eastern tradition. It's found in the ancient Vedic tradition of India. It's called Veda, means knowledge. It's also found in ancient China, in the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu talked about it, the pathless path, right? And in Buddhism, we call it being. And even in the Western tradition, even in the Abrahamic religions, we find that, Imam Ali talks about it in Shia, and in Christianity, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Francis, right, of Assisi, all speak of a higher state of consciousness. Now, it doesn't really matter even if you are not religious, because this is not a belief system. It doesn't involve any expectation.
I want to
ask, natural state,
I want to ask about the higher state of consciousness, because how do you ensure that it doesn't sound like a hocus pocus sort of
very good question.
A very vague philosophical area.
Very good question. Yeah. How do you ensure? And this is why it fell out 50, 60 years ago. It was philosophical, but even if it is philosophical, it was respectable philosophers like William James, who was the father of American psychology, Abraham Maslow, another famous psychology.
Yeah, the theory of needs.
The theory of needs, and before, and he has the eighth state beyond self-actualization. They call it transcendence. But then the question is it just these people's experience, or is it just a concept? The answer is no, because today we can measure these things. So it's not a hoax, because we can actually measure the parameters. We can replicate. That means we can have random assignments. We can take people in the population and say one group practices this technique of transcendental meditation, another group some kind of mindfulness technique or other kinds of meditation. The kind of access to this fourth state, while it's natural, has to be systematic, and it has to be able to be studied and validated objectively. It's not just subjective. So your question is spot on. So the objective validation would be in terms of the brain waves, the EEG, and there are very marked differences in the fourth state. So it's not just hocus pocus, and people are actually reporting they are awake, but they've gone beyond thinking. So, but there is a specific technique to access this fourth state of higher consciousness. It's called transcendental meditation, which has over 700 studies done in good research. And recently you had Jim Carrey attend his university commencement, and he practices it. And before that, it was Oprah Winfrey who visited this town. And then there's also Dr. Mehmet Oz, the famous heart surgeon. So apart from the celebrities and personalities, a lot of serious research is being done all over the world, looking at the effects of developing transcendental consciousness and how it impacts cognition. That means thinking and learning, improvements in personality. It has been done all over the world, and you find people become more intelligent. I particularly am interested in this concept of intelligence called fluid intelligence, the ability to learn new things. It's not enough about what we know, but it's also how we learn. And because the world is changing so fast with globalization, knowledge becomes obsolete very quickly, so we must learn how to learn.
Yeah, it's also one of the recent article or research paper that you wrote, which were being published, right? Enlivening fluid intelligence in blended active learning within a cognitive literary value chain framework.
The cognitive literacy value chain means simply human beings process data into information, and then from information it goes to a higher level. It's called knowledge, and from knowledge it goes to an even higher level. It's called wisdom. So in business, because I'm professor in managerial psychology, my students are, many of them are senior managers, some are CEOs, some are consultants. It's a postgraduate program in managerial psychology at Help University. And so they want to be able to learn the best practice concepts, and then they want to apply. And sometimes application of best practices means you need to synthesize or adapt. So it's much more critical thinking, much more creative thinking. So it's not just good enough. You are aware of something or able to recall something. You must apply, but apply creatively and critically. So this is higher level thinking. This is the cognitive literacy value chain, from data to information through to knowledge and wisdom, right? And so higher consciousness makes this much more seamless and effortless, yeah. And so the research is there to answer your original question, that it's not hocus pocus. It's very scientifically documented. It's very precise. It's also found in the ancient traditions. It is spiritual, but you don't have to believe in it. So people who are not interested in spirituality, they want stress management. They learn this transcendental meditation.
Is it
And
similar?
they find it improves, yeah.
Is it similar to activities like yoga, doing yoga, or meditation, like how the Buddhists do it? I mean, how do you define like being in a state of transcendence, in a way, especially for those who are non-religious?
Very good question. Let's take it one by one. It is part of yoga. Yoga means union, and most people associate yoga with asana, which is physical activity. That is hatha yoga. Now, to practice transcendental meditation, or TM, you don't have to do this. It's a mental technique. Okay? So the second part of the question was, I think you mentioned Buddhism. Buddhism has the goal of what is called being. So transcendental consciousness leads to this being, or this experience of the real self beyond the ego, beyond the world of change or relativity. Now, then the question about religion, and I shall also include philosophy. You don't really have to know about anything. Even Buddhism may not interest you, or religion may not even interest you at all. It doesn't matter. Most people who learn transcendental meditation are busy people in business and students, and they use it as a stress management tool, and that is good enough. We don't really analyze the motivations of people who want to learn, but nonetheless, it leads to this experience of the fourth state of restful alertness, transcendental consciousness. And that is basically the experience of the real self, not your ego or what your status is in life or how much you know or how much you earn and who you are, but the real self, which is the unchanging self. Now, the experience of this is the most important thing. It's not even me talking about it, because while it sounds nice, that remains a concept. What is much more profound is the experience of it. Now, here's the thing. It is unlike your other part of the question was, how does it compare to other meditations? Very good question. A lot of research has been done on transcendental meditation. And one of my colleagues is Fred Travis, and he has compared the effects of transcendental meditation in terms of the EEG. EEG is a way of measuring the brain waves. We put electrodes on the scalp of the brain. And today EEG has advanced to quite a sophisticated level. It can look more deeply in the brain along with the MRI scans. We find the effects of transcendental meditation are very different from other meditations. So we have random assignments and control groups involving mindfulness, focus, vipassana, and so on. All those things I don't want to comment about because, I respect those traditions. But TM is not so much a philosophical. It's not presented as spiritual or
it's more like a psychological, is it? It's more psychological.
It's psychological, but it goes beyond thinking to the source of thinking. Now, here's the interesting part. It is not based on mood. That means you don't expect. It's not mood-making. It is not contemplation. And here's the best part. It is not concentration. Most people, when they think of meditation, they say, I cannot do it because it's going to involve concentration. I cannot, force my mind to focus. No. It's nothing like that. It's effortless. It's very natural. It's very unique. So I've taught children from the age of 5, right up to people much older than me. But most people are at the prime of their life. They're busy. So they want to be able to quieten the mental activity. So we use a thought to transcend. That means to go beyond the thinking process. As I said before, it is not involving concentration. It is not involving contemplation or meaning. It uses a thought like an elevator or lift. That means we go from the top floor, we go to the foundation. The foundation supports, let's say, a high-rise building of a skyscraper of 100 stories. So the deeper you go, the more powerful the thought is.
I see.
And so in modern physics, we find that the consciousness field at the fundamental level is the same as the unified field. That's what some of the modern physicists say. And we also find that I've noticed that I was looking at your bio, if I may, and your profile, Arlene, and you're interested in world peace.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, my first research in transcendental meditation was on world peace. I did it at the University of Leicester.
Yeah.
For a dissertation, yeah.
Dr. Mohan, I think we will take a short break, and when we return back, I think we will definitely want to know more about how it relates to globalization and to the idea of the larger society, especially in social in the context of social science.
What I just mentioned, even though it's more micro and intimate before we extrapolate to the macro and globalization, may still be a lot for people to fathom so quickly. So I'll welcome questions. Yeah.
Okay, definitely.
Sure. So I'll stay. I won't hang up. Are you going to call me back? Or
I will call. No, you just wait for. We'll take a short break. You don't have to hang out. We will continue again after a song.
All right. Thank you very much.
The voice of sharing. Durian ASEAN.
Hey, this is Arlene, and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. At our ASEAN Breakfast Call today, we will continue our discussion with Dr. Mohan Raj Gurubatham on Transcendence and Globalisation towards a higher thinking society. So from the micro perspective, Dr. Mohan, you have explained earlier on a number of on what is a higher order thinking, on consciousness, and on transcendence. So when we apply it on the global context, how do you explain it? How do we understand it in terms of globalization and the idea of transcendence?
Very good question. First and foremost, today, what does globalization mean? I think the more kind of common understanding of it relates to consumerism. We like to wear brands. In China, they want to carry those expensive bags from Europe. People want to drive a Ferrari. People know rock concerts and so on. That's very good. Everybody appreciates the enrichment of life, cosmopolitan values. And then there's also another kind of downside. People say, no, excuse me, we are actually diluting some of our cultural integrity. What about the rainforest? What about the traditional peoples? What about their culture? Everything has got a cultural context. It's not just about Bangsa or, 77 Sunset Strip in Los Angeles and so on. Now, there's also another aspect of globalization which involves work. And so we have technology-enabled work, we have best practices in financial services, for example, which is technology-enabled. We have outsourcing. All these things represent kind of impact, if you will, not just in terms of consumerism, but the way we work, we add value, and the way we also learn. So what does this mean? It seems like we are beginning to learn from each other, but mostly it has been a one-way street. It seems to be coming from the western part of the world. And now the others are saying, well, we want to also preserve our cultural integrity, but at the same time, we want to learn from the best in the West, right? We need to adapt and progress. At the same time, we want to be able to keep abreast of all the rapid changes. As I mentioned earlier before the break, there's rapid obsolescence of knowledge. I think the cycle is about 14 to 18 months. So we need to learn how to learn. So higher order thinking and fluid intelligence, first of all, helps you to keep up with the change. It helps you to manage stress, but more importantly, also on a cognitive level, that means about learning and thinking, it develops fluid intelligence, which is the area of my research, the ability to learn new things.
Also, fluid intelligence is the ability to learn new things?
Exactly. It's also about creativity. It's about being adaptive. I learned something in one context, I can apply it in another context.
So it's not just like plain IQ, like knowing it in a fixed format. It's about...
Well, intelligence testing does involve fluid intelligence. It has both components, crystallized and fluid. It was Raymond Cattell, a psychologist. There's a Malay proverb, bagaimana acuan, begitulah kuenya. Proverb, yeah. So, and it actually means the acuan is like a cookie cutter. We need to transcend or unfreeze from the cookie cutter mold. It's not about me cramming information inside you, but developing your ability to process the information, transforming the information to something higher called knowledge, and even higher still wisdom. Now, coming back to globalization, there's a much more subtle aspect, not just the obvious aspect. The subtle aspect is we're all connected to each other. And it does, what I do affects you, even though you and I may be in separate places physically. You may be in the northern part of the Klang Valley, I might be in the southern part, or in the northern part of the world, and I might be in the southern part of the world in Australia. But what I do has an impact today. That's why we have, global warming, right? We have climate change. We also have, of course, outsourcing, where people in India, for example, are developing higher value-added skills. We call it knowledge process outsourcing. They've gone well beyond what is called business process outsourcing. They're doing R&D. For example, they've been analyzing MRI scans in Chennai and doing financial analysis, and then when the Americans sleep, they are processing this data, transforming it into knowledge and then into wisdom, and then they're sending it back to America. So when the Americans wake up at 9 a.m., right in Rochester in the hospital or in New York in Wall Street, they've got the analysis done. So we can do this in Malaysia. They're already beginning to do this in the Philippines. So this, in a way, transcends, again, that word, means to go beyond the physical boundaries. In fact, it collapses time and space, so that, we have what is called the depth of distance. Another way of saying it is geography is history.
I see. So, remember earlier on, you want to touch on the topic of world peace. Maybe you can sort of continue on it and sort of just explain how it relates to transcendence.
Yeah. What I just talked about, if you want to paraphrase it, it's called the knowledge economy. Knowledge is basically the resource today. In the old days, it was raw materials, but today knowledge has a premium. That's why brands are perceptual assets. And knowledge, like, software companies, they are valued very much in terms of their market capitalization. Now, coming to world peace, when I was a graduate student doing a dissertation at the University of Leicester in England, actually it was a media research center, the International Center for Media Research, since you're in media, and we looked at basically conflict and world peace. So I wanted to look, and this university, this center was all about looking at what we call emerging markets, the developing countries. It is part of UNESCO's New World Information Order. It's not just about us watching, cartoons from America or American Idol. We want to see how the whole world can participate in media, but at the same time, the media seems biased because of the reports on conflict, because there are wars in the Middle East, wars in Southeast Asia, and so on. So how do we make this, before we start enacting or training journalists, for example, to be balanced, we need to understand what society is about. And we found that media is not media doesn't really just create attitudes. What it really does is it reinforces. It's a powerful reinforcer. It may not always be the shaper as people think. Now, but nonetheless, the reinforcing role is very powerful. And so we put the media in a milieu in terms of context, a social context. So the media reflects that society. And the society is very violent. The media tend to reflect that violence a lot, like television or the news reporting. And then you can't blame journalists, for example, for being biased. They have an unwitting bias, like a template. They are not conscious of their bias. And because of the editorial policies, they must find something that quickly grabs attention.
So how can we move forward from there? I mean, from those kind of unconscious biasness.
Yeah, that's one thing I think the media institutions have to nurture in terms of the development, in terms of the education of the media professionals, and they are beginning to do that already, because most schools of media around the world are already providing this more balanced view of journalism, plus also an exposure to other subjects like sociology and politics. But your question was basically on world peace. So let me just cut to the chase if I will. So then when we look at media, we realize that if the society is violent or tends to have a bias which shapes or which in a way influences the media to look for newsworthy stories which are sensational, right? I thought, this is where I began to think a little bit more differently from my professors in England. And I thought, why don't we look at a way of creating world peace? That means removing the stress and the strain and the negativity in society So it brought me back to transcendental meditation because there was some research published a little earlier which looked at American cities where they had 1% of the population. That means, let's say, a population of about a small city in America, 100,000. With just 1,000 people, that's 1%, are practicing this technique. They have a more powerful effect on the remainder 99%. And there seems to be an analogy with physics and electromagnetics, where 1% of the electrons, when they are orderly, neutralize the negativity or disorderliness of the 99% of the electrons in the field. So they had 17 cities in America matched in terms of demographic variables. And this was a published study. It was a longitudinal study over 1 year. 1% practicing transcendental meditation. Crime rates reduced by an average of 15 to 17%. Statistically significant. So there have been 30 other studies now replicated. And one study which I did in England was looking at Eastern Europe, looking at what is called the balkanization of Eastern Europe. Yugoslavia were breaking up. So there's another formula where you have the advanced practice of transcendental meditation, and people do what is called hopping, like yogic flying, and where it becomes the square root of 1%. So there is a specific number. So let me just give you the most basic intuitive principle. When an individual is peaceful with themselves, that means their mind settles down and they are rested, you find that it's very easy to be harmonious. So the individuals are the unit of society. If we want to turn the whole forest green, we don't just superficially try to make the forest green by attending to just the leaves. We actually water the roots of the tree so that leaves become nourished and the forest becomes green. The approach is basically individual, but it has an effect on the macro. Now, however, even if on the macro level, you don't have to have everyone doing this particular technique. Just a small percentage. It has an exponential effect.
I just want to add, Singapore has this Intelligent Nation Master Plan that will be implemented in 2015, and a lot of upgrading and changes will be happening in terms of its infrastructure and its telecommunication. But at the same time, you can't help that but to see that Singapore always hit the spot when it comes to the top country, the most stressful countries in the world or in Southeast Asia. So how can a country develop to become a more intelligent society, a more higher thinking society, without having to be without having unnecessary stress or unnecessary feeling of being unnecessary stress and unnecessary feeling where they feel that they are being caught in this big cage of being suppressed.
Right. So basically, that's an excellent question. You're right. I agree with you. Singapore seems to always hog the radar in terms of the rankings, in terms of transparency, in terms of education, and what I would call the cognitive literacy value chaining. But Singapore, nonetheless, is very challenged because, you see, that comes with a big price that Singaporeans have to pay, and that price is they are very stressed. There's another survey which showed, I think a couple of years ago, or last year or 2 years ago, which shows that Singaporeans rank among the most unhappy people in the world. And Singaporeans then began to explain to the government. Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly respect what Singapore has achieved, and the government really is very, very responsive. They are listening very carefully. The Prime Minister is on Facebook. They have a lot of communication. It's a two-way street. It's trying to migrate from the traditional stereotype of Singapore being authoritarian and top-down. Nonetheless, they have to be very competitive and progressive because they are challenged, they're small. But it comes at a very tremendous cost in terms of human stress and even social stress. And then they need to have foreign workers, they call them alien talent, as well as people working in the semi-skilled industry. So that adds to the stress the most. Now the answer is surprisingly very simple. Basically, they are already doing this as we speak. They are already advocating a lifestyle of balance, a healthy lifestyle, exercise, relaxation. They also want the Singaporeans to be much more than just cognizant of their Asian roots, but basically also celebrate that in terms of diversity, because they represent people from all around ASEAN and further from China and India. So being connected with your traditions, taking time to exercise, taking time to be quiet, right, is what the government is trying to do. So they are fully aware of this, and they will always implement a kind of a social developmental program or many programs. They have that ethos. Now, the simpler aspect is, of course, I will recommend transcendental meditation because it can be practiced by anyone. It only requires 15 to 20 minutes, 2 sittings, morning and evening. It's learned in 5 days, 1 hour each day. It does not involve concentration, contemplation. It's not religious. It's not even philosophical. Treat this as a just mechanistic stress management tool. No need to expect. And it also has the most amount of research, which you cannot, bar none on this planet. Very solid research from top journals in physiology and psychology. So they're already practicing this now in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I'm a great fan of Brazil in terms of the World Cup, as well as Brazilian music, if you've seen my Facebook. But there are 38,000 students. The Department of Education in Rio de Janeiro, has got transcendental meditation going for 38,000 students. In terms of the development of fluid intelligence, the ability to be progressive, learning how to learn, it certainly is very good in terms of reducing the stress of society. For example, a lot of research has shown in Dr. Oz, the sort of famous health show, along with Oprah Winfrey, they both their companies practicing transcendental meditation, Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Oz. And the research has shown that it prevents hypertension and heart disease. Very solid research over 1 year, which is stress-based. It's the best research. The American federal government has a National Institute of Health. It's a very conservative federal agency which has given a total grant funding of about $32 million to at-risk African Americans in inner cities, and it matched with control groups doing other things, and they found that the hypertension, the plaques, right, and the scabs that form the plaques in the blood vessels all begin to just disappear.
I see.
Now, coming back to other forms of stress management, coming back to how transcendental meditation affects stress, there have been many other studies that look at reduced hospitalization costs, which are published in top journals in healthcare in the United States and internationally, which shows significant reduction, so much so the premiums on insurance are less. So this is published in mainline professional journals in psychology, psychosomatic medicine, and medical journals. So yes, it is that Singaporeans are very progressive. They will take this up, and it is completely neutral of religion or spirituality. It's thoughtful information.
Yeah. So anyway, we are at the end of the show now. Thank you, Dr. Mohan.
I hope that was interesting, and I hope you learned anything.
Yeah, definitely it's interesting. I think we should have another session on just to explain more on country experience in terms of trying to expand the transcendence or the fluid intelligence of the country.
It's just a very simple, natural, innocent state of consciousness. You can be a child and learn it. Now, if people want to learn more about this, they can address inquiries through you and through Durian ASEAN, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.